Our first story tonight was sent in by a man named Adrian. Back in the early 2000s, Adrian was 22 years old and attended college while working evenings at a small, family owned funeral home in Alice, Texas. Most nights were quiet. His job wasn't anything unusual. He vacuumed the viewing rooms, emptied trash, arranged chairs, cleaned up after visitations, and made sure everything was ready for the following morning. But there was one part of the job Adrian hated: closing the funeral home. Because once the families left, once the employees went home, and once the lights inside these long hallways were turned off, the building felt different. Adrian never believed in ghosts, at least not until the chapel doors started opening by themselves. This is Adrian's story. My name is Adrian, and this happened when I was 22. I'm in my 40s now, and I've had plenty of time to convince myself that there was a logical explanation for what happened. The problem is, every explanation I've come up with falls apart eventually. Back then, I was attending college and needed a job that worked around my classes. My uncle knew the owner of a small funeral home in Alice, Texas, and told me they needed someone to work evenings. I wasn't exactly excited about working at a funeral home, but the hours were good, the pay wasn't terrible, and most of the job was pretty easy. I usually came in around 4 in the afternoon. If there was a visitation, I helped direct people towards the chapel, brought extra chairs when they were needed, emptied trash cans, cleaned bathrooms, and did whatever else the funeral director asked me to do. After everyone left, I cleaned. That was the part I didn't like. The funeral home wasn't huge, but at night it felt enormous. There was a lobby in the front with two couches and a little table covered with religious pamphlets. A long hallway ran through the center of the building. There were offices on one side, two viewing rooms on the other, and at the end of the hallway was the main chapel. The chapel had these two large wooden doors. They were heavy, really heavy. You couldn't accidentally bump one and make its way open. I knew that because part of my closing routine was checking those doors. Every night I would pull them closed until I heard the latch click. Then I'd tug on them. Locked. After that, I turned off the hallway lights and leave through the employee entrance. For the first couple of months, nothing happened. Then we had the funeral for a woman named Miss Salazar. Obviously, that's not her real name. I still remember her funeral because of how many people attended. She was an older woman, late 70s, I think, and apparently she had lived in Alice almost her entire life. Everybody seemed to know her. Her visitation lasted several hours. By around 9 that evening, most of the family had gone. Her daughter was the last person to leave. Before she walked out, she went back into the chapel alone. She stayed in there about 15 minutes. When she came out, she'd been crying. She thanked me for staying late and said something I'll never forget. She said she hated being alone. I didn't think anything about it. I just told her we'd take good care of her mother. The funeral director left shortly after. That meant I was alone. I started cleaning, I vacuumed the lobby, emptied the trash, straightened the chairs, then went into the chapel. Miss Salazar's casket was at the front. I didn't go anywhere near it. There wasn't any reason to. I picked up some tissues people had left behind, straightened a couple of chairs, and checked the side tables. Then I walked out. I pulled both chapel doors closed. I tugged on them. I walked towards the lobby. I'd made it maybe halfway down the hallway when I heard something behind me creak. I stopped. I knew immediately what it was. One of the chapel doors. I turned around. The right door was open about a foot. I just stared at it. My first thought was that I hadn't closed it properly. So I walked back. I pulled the door open, then shut it hard. I tugged on it twice. It wasn't opening. I remember actually laughing at myself. I said something like, "Come on, Adrian." Then I walked away again. I turned off the lights in the viewing room, checked the bathrooms, grabbed my backpack from the office. Probably 10 minutes had passed when I came back into the hallway. Both chapel doors were open, not slightly, completely open. I stopped walking. I could see straight into the chapel. Most of the lights were off except for two lamps near the front, and between them, Miss Salazar's casket. I didn't move for several seconds. Then I called out, "Hello?" Nothing. I thought maybe one of the employees had come back. I checked the parking lot through the front window. My car was the only one there. That was when I started getting nervous. I walked back towards the chapel. I didn't go inside. I stood in the doorway and looked around, and there was nothing. I closed the doors again. This time, I pushed them against them with both hands. They didn't move. Then I left. I didn't finish cleaning. I turned off the lights, locked the employee entrance, got in my car, and drove home. The next morning, I told one of the funeral directors what happened. His name is Ray. Ray had worked there forever. I expected him to laugh. He didn't. He just asked, "Which doors?" I said, "The chapel." He looked down the hallway. Then he said, "They do that sometimes." I asked what he meant. He shrugged. "Old building, that was it." But something about the way he answered bothered me. It was like he'd heard the story before. Miss Salazar's funeral took place that morning. Afterward, her casket was taken to the cemetery. That night, I worked again. And I remember thinking, at least the chapel is empty tonight. That made me feel better. Around 8:30, everyone else left. I started cleaning, and nothing happened. By 9:30, I was almost finished. I walked down the hallway. The chapel door was closed. I checked them. They were both locked. I turned around, and then I heard a knock. I froze. It came from behind the chapel door. One knock. Not loud, just a soft knock. I stared at the door. Then it happened again. I didn't open them. I walked backward, down the hallway. Then, 3 more knocks. At that point, I ran. I grabbed my keys and went straight outside. I called Ray from the parking lot. He answered half asleep. I told him someone was inside the chapel. He asked if I'd check. I said absolutely not. So Ray drove over. It took him maybe 15 minutes. We went inside together. Ray opened the chapel doors, and there was nothing. It was empty. He checked behind the curtains, the storage closet, the side entrance. Nobody. Then he noticed how freaked out I was and told me something. Years earlier, another employee had complained about those doors. According to Ray, sometimes after funerals, the chapel doors would open during the night. Not every funeral, just occasionally. I asked him why nobody had told me. He smiled and said, "Because then you wouldn't work nights." I didn't find that funny. For the next several weeks, nothing happened. And eventually I started convincing myself it had been the air conditioning. Pressure changes, old hinges, whatever. Then came the security footage. One Monday morning, I arrived for work and Ray called me into the office. He looked serious. He asked, "Were you here last night?" I wasn't. The funeral home had been closed Sunday evening. Nobody should have been inside. Ray turned his computer monitor towards me. The funeral home had security cameras. The camera looked straight down the hallway towards the chapel. The video time-stamped 2:14 a.m. The hallway was dark. The chapel doors were closed. For almost 30 seconds, nothing happened. Then, the right chapel door slowly opened. I remember leaning closer to the screen. There was nobody there. The door continued opening until it stopped. Then the left door opened, slowly. Both doors were now completely open. Ray fast forward. They stayed that way for almost 4 minutes. Then something happened that made my stomach drop. The left door closed, then the right. Not slammed, not blown shut. They closed slowly, one after another, almost like someone had walked through them and then pulled them closed behind themselves. I asked Ray if there was a camera inside the chapel. There weren't. Then I asked if the alarm had gone off. No, no exterior doors open, no motion sensor near the entrance had activated, nothing. I told him I wasn't closing alone anymore, and for a while I didn't. But about 2 months later, someone called in sick and I got stuck closing. That night, there had been another visitation, an elderly man, small family, nothing unusual. Everybody left around 9. I cleaned quickly. I wanted out of there. Around 9:40, I was standing near the front desk when I heard it, a creak. My whole body went cold. I looked down the hallway. One chapel door was open. I didn't wait. I grabbed my keys, but before I reached the employee exit, I heard something else. A woman's voice, very faint, coming from the hallway. I couldn't understand what she said. I stopped. I wish I hadn't, because then I heard it again. This time clearly. Adrian, my name. I ran outside. I didn't lock the chapel. I didn't turn off the hallway lights. I didn't care. I sat in my car with the door locked and called Ray. While I waited for him, I kept looking at the building. Most of the windows were dark, except the chapel. The chapel lights were still on. From the parking lot, I could see those 2 wooden doors through the front hallway. They were open. Then, one of the chapel lights went out. I watched it happen. A few seconds later, the second one went out. The funeral home was completely dark. Ray arrived about 10 minutes later. We searched the building together. Nobody was inside. The next morning, I checked the security footage. You could see me standing at the front desk. You could see the chapel doors open behind me. You could see me suddenly stop, then run. But there was something the camera didn't record: the voice. The security system didn't have audio. I quit about 3 weeks later. Not because anything else happened. I just couldn't do it anymore. Years passed, and I moved away, got married, started a completely different career. Eventually, the funeral home changed owners. About 10 years ago, I was visiting family in Alice and drove past the building. I don't know why, but I stopped. The funeral home was still there. Different sign, different owners. I sat in my car looking at it for a while. Then I noticed an older man walking towards his truck. I asked if he worked there. He said yes. I told him I'd worked there years earlier. We talked for a minute. Then, mostly as a joke, I asked, "Do those chapel doors still open by themselves?" The man's expression changed. He looked towards the building, then back at me, and said, "Who told you about the doors?" I told him nobody had. I had seen it myself. He stared at me for a few seconds. Then he said something I still think about. "We've replaced those doors twice." I asked why. He said the new owners assumed there was something wrong with the hinges, so they replaced the hinges. The doors kept opening. Eventually, they replaced the entire doors. They still open. I asked him if it happens often. He shook his head. "Only sometimes." Then he added, "Usually after somebody's been in the chapel." I knew exactly what he meant: a funeral. I thanked him and walked back to my car. Before I left, I looked through the funeral home's front window one last time, straight down the long hallway. The chapel doors were closed. And even after all those years, I found myself waiting just to see if they would open. My name is Rafael, and for almost 3 years, I worked at a funeral home in Kingsville, Texas. I was 24 when this happened. I wasn't a funeral director or anything like that. I was basically an assistant. I helped set up visitations, move flowers, arrange chairs, cleaned the building, helped families find where they needed to go, and occasionally drove one of the company vehicles. Most nights, I was gone by 9. But if we had a late visitation, sometimes I stayed until 10 or 11. Being alone there never really bothered me. People always assume funeral homes are creepy. Honestly, during the daytime, they're not. They're basically offices with really nice furniture. But nighttime was different. Once you turn off most of the lights, the building changed. We had two viewing rooms, a chapel, several offices, and a long hallway that connected everything. There was also an employee area towards the back, small kitchen, a break room, storage rooms, and beyond that was the preparation area. I didn't spend much time back there, not because I was scared. It just wasn't part of my job. The first strange thing happened on a Thursday night. We had a visitation that evening. Nothing unusual. The family left around 9:30. My manager, Carlos, left shortly after. Before leaving, he told me, "Lock up when you're done." I'd done it 100 times. I cleaned the lobby, vacuumed the viewing room, took trash towards the dumpster. Then I went into the employee break room. Something immediately looked wrong. There was a cabinet above the sink, and the door was open. That wasn't particularly strange, but sitting on the counter underneath it was a sleeve of crackers. It had been opened. I assumed Carlos had. I threw the wrapper away and closed the cabinet. Maybe 15 minutes later, I came back. The cabinet was open again. I stared at it for a second. Then I laughed. I thought maybe the hinge was loose. I closed it, finished cleaning, and went home. Nothing happened for several days. Then the following Tuesday, I was working late again. It was around 10. I was in the lobby when I heard something from the back hallway. It sounded like something heavy had fallen. I called out, "Carlos?" No answer. I knew Carlos had already left. I walked towards the back, and the hallway was dark except for one light near the employee entrance. I turned on the rest. Nothing. I checked the break room. It was empty. Kitchen, empty. The storage room, there was nothing there. Then I noticed something. The door leading towards the preparation area was slightly open. That door was supposed to stay closed. I walked over and pulled it shut. I didn't go inside. I figured somebody hadn't closed it properly. That was the explanation I gave myself. But over the next couple of weeks, little things kept happening. Food disappeared from the refrigerator. Nothing major. A soda, a sandwich, a bag of chips. We had several employees, so nobody really cared. Then somebody started leaving the employee bathroom dirty. Again. Nobody thought much of it. We blamed each other. One afternoon, Carlos actually called a staff meeting because everyone was getting irritated. He basically told us, "Clean up after yourselves." That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. One Friday night, I was closing alone. There hadn't been a visitation that evening, so the funeral home was completely empty. At around 9:15, I was sitting at the front desk finishing some paperwork. That's when I heard footsteps. They came from the hallway behind me. Slow, then paused. I turned around, and there was nothing. I stood up. "Hello?" No answer. Then, I walked towards the hallway. "Carlos?" Nothing. I checked my phone, and there was no messages. I walked through the entire building, and there was nobody. I even checked the employee parking lot. My truck was the only vehicle there. I remember standing outside thinking, okay, now that's weird. When I went back inside, something happened that scared me enough that I called Carlos. The break room door was closed. I'd left it open. I knew I had. I called him, he answered immediately, and thought I was messing with him. I told him, "I'm serious, someone's inside the building." He told me to check the exterior doors. Every one was locked. Then he said something that actually made me feel better. "It's an old building." That explanation worked for me. Buildings make noises, air conditioners turn on, doors move, pipes knock. Fine. I finished my paperwork and left. About a week later, one of my coworkers started joking that we had a ghost. Her name was Monica. She said she'd been in the office one morning before anyone else arrived and heard someone walking near the back. She even gave our supposed ghost a name, Mr. Garcia. I don't know why. There wasn't anyone named Garcia connected to the funeral home. After that, anytime something happened, everyone blamed Mr. Garcia. Missing soda, Mr. Garcia. Door open, Mr. Garcia. Noise in the hallway, Mr. Garcia. It became a joke, until the security camera caught something. Our cameras weren't great. This was 2011. The video was grainy. There was one camera in the lobby, another near the employee entrance, and one covering part of the back hallway. One morning, Carlos called me into his office. He showed me footage from the night before. At 11:45 p.m., the motion sensor on the back camera activated. The hallway was dark. At first, nothing happened. Then something moved at a very edge of the screen. It was quick, just a shadow passing across the hallway. Carlos replayed it. I said, "That's a person." He wasn't convinced. He thought it might have been an insect near the camera. But insects don't open doors. About 20 seconds later, the break room door moved. It slowly opened. Nobody walked out. Nobody walked in. It just opened. Carlos actually laughed. I didn't laugh, because I remembered the footsteps. We checked the exterior cameras. Nobody had entered. So again, we forgot about it. Then came the night everything changed. It was a Wednesday. We had a visitation that evening for an elderly man. A lot of people attended, probably 70 or 80. By 10, everyone was gone. Carlos left around 10:15. I stayed behind because the family had brought food and there was a mess in the reception area. Before Carlos left, we checked the building together. That's important. We checked the bathrooms, viewing rooms, chapel, lobby, everything. Nobody was there. Carlos left. I locked the employee entrance behind him. I started cleaning. At around 10:40, I carried a trash bag towards the back. When I passed the break room, I stopped. The refrigerator door was open. Not cracked, wide open. Light spilling into the dark room. I stood there staring at it. Then I heard something. Breathing, very faint, coming from somewhere nearby. I called out, "Who's there?" The breathing stopped. I backed into the hallway. That's when I noticed the preparation room door was open. I knew Carlos had closed it. I had watched him. I pulled out my phone and called him. There was no answer. I called again, and still nothing. Then I heard movement. Not footsteps this time. Something scraped across the floor inside the preparation room. I should have left immediately. Instead, I walked towards the door. I don't know why. Curiosity, I guess. I pushed it open slightly. The room was dark. I reached around the wall and flipped on the light. There was nothing. Then I noticed another door near the back. It led to a small supply room. The door was open, and I stared at it, and suddenly, I smelled cigarette smoke. Nobody smoked inside the building. Absolutely nobody. The smell was fresh. That's when my brain finally put everything together. The food, the bathroom, the footsteps, the doors, the security footage. This wasn't a ghost. Someone had been inside the building. I backed away, then I saw it, a shoe, just the front of it, sticking out from behind the supply room door. I froze. Somebody was standing behind it. I couldn't see their face, couldn't see their body, just the toe of a dirty sneaker. I whispered, "Oh my God." When the shoe moved, I ran. Behind me, I heard the supply room door slam against the wall. Then footsteps, fast footsteps, coming after me. I sprinted down the hallway. I could hear whoever it was behind me. I didn't turn around. I reached the lobby and the front doors were locked. For a half a second, I panicked because I couldn't get the deadbolts open. My hands were shaking. The footsteps were getting closer. Then I heard a man's voice behind me. "Wait!" I got the door open and ran outside. I didn't stop until I reached my truck. I locked the doors and called 911. From inside the truck, I looked towards the funeral home. The front door I'd escaped through was still open. Nobody came out. Police arrived within minutes. 3 officers went inside. They searched the building. At first, they found nobody. Then one officer noticed something in the supply room. There were cardboard boxes stacked against the back wall. Behind them, there was a narrow space between shelving units and the wall. There was a blanket, empty water bottles, food wrappers, a backpack, cigarette butts, and several changes of clothing. Someone had been sleeping there, not for one night. Police estimated he'd probably been hiding inside the funeral home for weeks. But the person was gone. They found a small service door near the back of the building unlocked. We almost never used it. Police believe that's how he escaped. The next morning, we went through more security footage. That's when we discovered how he'd been doing it. During busy visitations, dozens of people moved through the building. He would apparently come inside with everyone else. Nobody noticed him. He'd wander towards the bathrooms, then disappear towards the employee hallway. Once everyone left, he stayed. There was one piece of footage I still wish I'd never seen. It was from 3 nights before I found him. The camera showed me walking down the back hallway. I disappeared around the corner, and about 15 seconds later, a man stepped into the hallway behind me. Thin, baseball cap, dark jacket. He stood there watching the direction I'd gone for almost 30 seconds. Then he stepped backwards into the darkness. I'd never know he was there. Police eventually identified him. He was a homeless man who had apparently been staying in an abandoned building across town. As far as I know, he was never arrested for what happened at the funeral home. Maybe they found him later. I honestly don't know. I stopped asking. I quit about 2 months after that. People sometimes ask if working in a funeral home made me believe in ghosts. I didn't. I've never seen a ghost, never heard a dead person talking, never watched anything supernatural happen. But even now, if I'm alone in a building and hear a noise somewhere behind me, I don't think about ghosts. I think about the security footage. I think about that man stepping into the hallway after I walked past, watching me, waiting for me to disappear around the corner. And I think about all those nights we laughed about the funeral home ghost. All those missing snacks, the footsteps, the doors, the noises. We thought something dead was haunting the building. We were wrong. Someone was alive inside it. And somehow, that was much more terrifying. And with that, we come to the end of tonight's broadcast. 2 funeral homes, 2 people working after everyone else had gone home, and 2 very different reasons to be afraid of what might be waiting at the end of a dark hallway. If you were alone inside a funeral home late at night and heard footsteps coming from the hallway, what would scare you more? Finding someone there, or finding out you were never alone in the first place? Thank you for spending another night with me here on tonight's broadcast, A Place for a Story. If you enjoyed tonight's story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and come back for our next broadcast. Until then, lock the doors, pay attention to those sounds in the hallway, and remember, sometimes the things we can't explain are frightening, but sometimes the explanation is worse. Until the shadows call again. Good night.